Welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to take a look at the final section of Chapter 5, which deals with reinforcing behavior. Now, when you take a look at reinforcing, you're looking at behavioral sciences, and that's the area that we're in today. People like B.F. Skinner, Albert Bandura, Ivan Pavlov, these are individuals who popularized reinforcement theory, behavior modification, and the whole science of behavior theories in general. What does make a person do what you want them to do? What motivates them? Well, these theorists would believe that you can make anybody do what you want them to do. You just apply the proper amount of rewards or punishments, and they're going to act appropriately. So let's take a look at this final section as we take a look at behavior modification and behavior theories. Okay, today we're going to finish up Chapter 5 as we take a look at what reinforces behavior. Now, when we take a look at reinforcement and motivation, there are some learning-based perspectives on motivation, and that's what really gets into behavior modification and reinforcement theory and all of that. So learning, as we will see, is a relatively permanent change in behavior or behavioral potential resulting from direct or indirect experience. For instance, when you come to class, you didn't know everything about organizational behavior, but as you take this course, more things are being presented and you're experiencing new things, and then learning takes place, and hopefully what you take in will stay with you and be enduring. Now, how does learning occur? Well, the traditional view is through classical conditioning. Now, these are models that have been popularized by people like B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson, and they believe that you can be conditioned to behave any way you want to, and we condition you through rewards and punishments and so forth. And the definition for that is a simple form of learning that links a conditional response with an unconditioned stimulus. And for instance, if I want you to be at work on time, I would provide for maybe consequences if you were late. First time, you're going to get written up. Second time, you may get fired. And because of that, because you want to avoid punishment, which that would be, you will show up on time and you learn the rules and abide by them. The contemporary view is that we learn through a cognitive process, and that assumes that people are conscious, active participants in how they learn. And today we have an ideology that really promotes the idea that as we experience new realities or new experiences, we create new realities. And those new realities become our paradigm. They become our ways of behaving. Now, reinforcement theory, I'm just going to go ahead and mark through all of this. As I said before, a guy named B.F. Skinner was one of the ones who really put this into the forefront of cognitive thinking. And he believed in operant conditioning, where behavior is a function of its consequences and reinforcement is a consequence of behavior. For instance, prisons today work on operant conditioning. They provide a system of rewards and punishments, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, to get the inmates to behave the way that they're supposed to behave. And that does work in certain arenas. And what I mean by positive and negative reinforcement is what you see here. Positive reinforcement is a reward or other desirable consequences that a person receives after exhibiting behavior. And it's not just relegated to prisons. We do that in business today. How many people get a bonus if they outperform everybody else, or if they do exceptionally well? That's positive reinforcement. That's a way of getting you to behave in the way that management wants you to behave. Negative reinforcement is avoidance. And here the opportunity to avoid or escape from an unpleasant circumstance after exhibiting a behavior. So you're going to show up for work on time to avoid the consequence of being written up maybe, or being fired, or whatever. Now, extinction decreases the frequency of behavior by eliminating a reward or desirable consequence that follows that behavior. If you have taken psychology, whether it's in high school or maybe in some of your studies, you probably remember the name Ivan Pavlov because he's normally in all of the basic psychology books. Ivan Pavlov was a man who conditioned his dogs to respond to a bell. He did an experiment in which he had two dogs, and he would ring a bell, and when he rang a bell, he would put meat down in front of the dogs. And they went through this routine every day, and he never deviated from this routine. He would ring a bell, and then when the bell rang, or after the bell rang, he would put meat down so that the dogs could eat. Well, when the bell rang, the dogs would start to salivate. They were trained to prepare to eat that meat, and salivation, I guess, is one of the ways that they prepared to eat the meat. So every time he rang that bell, they would salivate, and he would reward that behavior with that meat. Well, after a while, he would ring the bell, but he wouldn't put any meat down. Now, at first, the dogs would continue to salivate because they were programmed and taught, conditioned to salivate and believe that they were going to have meat as a reward. But after so long of not being given meat, they went back to their old behaviors, which when he rang a bell, nothing happened because they didn't expect the meat anymore, or the meat had gone from their mind as far as a reward. So that's extinction. And this is why a lot of times change efforts don't work, because we get the person to change their behavior, but we don't keep reinforcing it. And eventually extinction will occur. And then we have punishment, and that's an unpleasant or aversive consequence that results from the behavior. Spanking, corporal punishment, getting fired, going into solitary confinement in a prison. These are all examples of punishment, but these are ways of reinforcing behavior for the good or for the bad. And many people, like Skinner, believe that we as humans can be conditioned just like those dogs. We're no better than animals, inasmuch as we can be given the right amount of reinforcement and the right direction and be really conditioned to behave any way that they want us to behave or another person wants us to behave. Now here the types of reinforcers, and I'll let you guys take a look at that. You have present the stimulus. Positive reinforcement increases the behavior. Negative decreases the behavior. Extinction decreases the behavior. Whereas negative reinforcement increases the behavior. And this is just pretty much what we've just talked about. Now, social learning came up to us from a guy named Albert Bandura, who was a social psychologist, and he said that learning occurs when people observe the behaviors of others, recognize their consequences, and alter their own behavior as a result. If I see someone sticking their finger in a light socket, I'll see the consequences of it, and I'm going to avoid a light socket, at least putting my finger in there. So we learn by watching others. And he included some of the conditions for social learning. Behavior being observed and imitated must be relatively simple. And really what we do as children, when you think about it, we take simple examples from our parents and we mimic them. For instance, if we, let's say, have a certain way of picking up a fork, that's learned behavior, according to the social learning proponents. We watch our parents and we mimic what our parents do. And at first it's relatively simple, and then later on as we get older it can be fairly complex. We have observed and imitated behavior must be concrete, not intellectual. For instance, again, as a child sees his or her parents, then they are going to mimic that, not by what they say, but what they do. I remember a commercial that was quite effective. A dad came into the bedroom of his teenage son, and his son had a pack of cigarettes on the little nightstand, and his daddy just jumped all over him. He said, "Son, don't you know that this is a bad habit, that this can cause cancer and do all sorts of things, and I'm ashamed of you?" And he asked the son, "How could you do something like this?" And the son said, "Daddy, I watch you do it, and that's how I got started." And that's really a profound statement, because it doesn't make a difference what you say in most cases. It's what you do, and people watch you. And then learners must have the physical ability to imitate the observed behaviors. So with all things considered, if everything is going for you, you can learn from society and what they do and mimic that. Now, organizational behavior modification. And that's just the application of reinforcement theory to people in organization settings. Here you're applying what we just talked about, reinforcements, and the system of rewards and punishments, and taking away adverse consequences and all of that. Those are things that can get a person to behave in a way that many people want the person to behave in. But now we also have the schedules of reinforcement, which is what you see here. First of all, continuous reinforcement. And here the behavior is reinforced every time it occurs. And many people who are proponents of spanking, if you're going to spank, or if you're going to punish a child, always be consistent. Don't alternate. Sometimes they get away with it, sometimes they don't. If you tell a child, don't come in late or past 10 o'clock, and they come in at 10:01, don't give them a pass. Every time they're past 10 o'clock, you punish them, you ground them or whatever. Fixed interval. Behavior is reinforced according to some predetermined constant schedule based on time. So, for instance, every 2 weeks we get paid, or every month you get paid. That's a fixed interval where you know the span of time that will pass, and after that span of time has passed, you will receive whatever, whether it's positive or negative. Variable interval. Behavior is reinforced after periods of time, but the time span varies from one time to the next. And what you see here would be an example of maybe a slot machine where it will pay off, but you don't know when it's going to pay off. And that's the lure of gamblers, because they don't know that the next time they put a coin in that machine, if it's going to pay off or not. So they continually feed these things, and eventually they'll get a reward if they stay with it long enough. A fixed ratio. Behavior is reinforced according to the number of behaviors exhibited, with the number of behaviors needed to gain reinforcement held constant. And then you have variable ratio. Behavior is reinforced according to the number of behaviors exhibited, but the number of behaviors needed to gain reinforcement varies from one time to the next. So it's kind of like fixed interval and variable interval. You're just doing it within a fixed, established number of times. Well, today we had a chance to take a look at how behaviors can be controlled through the use of rewards, punishments, negative reinforcements, and positive reinforcements. We also took a look at extinction and how if we don't continually reinforce desired behaviors, the person can go back and revert to their original behaviors. The mind is complex, and there are many models that try to offer some type of explanation and guidance on how we can motivate people and produce from them acceptable behaviors, especially in the workplace. So this is just one model that can be applied, but there are many more, and we're going to take a look throughout the course of this textbook, many of the models and techniques that managers use to enhance productivity. Well, have a good week, and we will see you next week when we begin Chapter 6.